Boom, 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 boom. A side, B side. What side are you on?
Welcome back. It's A Side, B Side podcast. I'm Brooke Summers.
I am at a wine garden still.
And this week, the weather has been insane. So, what, 3/4 of the country is kind of sitting under snow, and power is out. There was a massive ice storm that hit Texas, and there was the horrific accident, and now the power is out. And well, all those people who said nothing will ever happen until Texas freezes over, you might have to start making good on some promises.
Because it's froze. It's a thing. It's happening.
Oh yeah. So if you said it's not gonna freeze, well, sorry for you. Oh man. Let's see what else happened this week. Oh, some good movies came out. What did you do this week?
I worked a little bit, which is a lot. But then I also, so when I was in Bowling Green and I was working with you, but also working at the sports station was hard for me in the summer because I'm a baseball guy. But in Bowling Green, Kentucky, your two closest teams are Cincinnati, St. Louis, maybe Atlanta. Like, baseball's not big there.
That's because you weren't here when we got our minor league baseball team.
I know. I would have loved that. I clearly, on many of my mistakes in life, that was another one. But when I was there, like in the summer, people wanted to talk about NASCAR. So this last weekend was Daytona. So I have still been a NASCAR fan because I got into it when I was down there. And then, like everything in the last week in most of the country, it dealt with weather. So the race was supposed to start at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, and it did. And they got through 14 laps. Then there was a big wreck, and then the weather came. And just like everybody's been dealing with in at least half the country, you can't fight the weather. When it decides it's going to do its thing, you just got to wait.
Yeah.
So I waited for 6 hours until it restarted. But every hour of those 6 hours, I was inundated with commercials for Kevin James' new series, The Crew, where he is a crew chief for a NASCAR team. So I've watched every episode of The Crew.
How is that?
Other people, it's a sitcom. It is, and there's nothing wrong with being a sitcom. I feel like if aliens came to Earth and they were like, hey, when is this sitcom from? And we all told them it was from the 90s, they would be fine with that. It feels very old school sitcom-esque. Even to the point where like the big like cliffhanger, and sorry, spoiler alert, because I know there are at least one person who's going to watch this series who's listening to this. The big like cliffhanger is will they or won't they, which is such a sitcom trope. Mm-hmm. You've got a couple people that everyone gets invested in, and will they get together? Won't they get together? Like, this show could literally have come out in 1997 and no one would have noticed.
So you're not losing anything by watching it, but you're not really gaining anything, is what you're saying.
If you love 90s sitcoms, or you love the sitcom genre, or you're a big Kevin James fan, it is more palatable than you would expect. Mm-hmm. But there's also nothing new there. And maybe that's just because I watched the entire series in a day. Mm-hmm. But still, it feels very familiar. If you love sitcoms, you'll love the show. If you like Kevin James, you'll like the show. I just don't know that it brings anything new to this genre. And the only reason I watched it is because I had a 6-hour rain delay on Sunday, and I saw so many commercials. And to be honest, I'm easily swayed.
So basically, does it follow the Kevin James kind of trope? Like he's the nerdy, kind of goofy guy with a hot wife, and then hilarity ensues?
I mean, it does ask more questions of him as an actor than probably any of the other series he's done. But it's also not that far off.
Right.
I mean, it's a workplace comedy with a laugh track. So if you like news radio, this is your jam.
Okay.
If you're hoping for something new, there's nothing new happening here.
Okay. All right. Well, I will put it on my back burner list when there is absolutely nothing else for me.
I mean, it's not bad. It's a sitcom. It's just a sitcom.
Yeah.
And sometimes like I was kind of hoping they would like change the dynamic a little bit. They'd find something new, and they really didn't. And I was disappointed because when Netflix does something, I expect they're gonna like kind of turn things on their head. But I think this was just money.
Yeah.
Just a money grab.
So anything else interesting this week?
No, not really. You want me to dive into the A side?
Can I talk about my week?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
All right. So this week there was a kind of a bunch of stuff that came out. HBO, of course, has that deal with Warner Brothers where they release a new movie on HBO Max plus in theaters, which this week nobody was going to the theaters because the weather was so bad. But it's Judas and the Black Messiah, starring Daniel Kaluuya, who we know from Get Out and also Black Panther, who is such a phenomenal actor. Also, if you watched Black Mirror that started in the UK and hit Netflix, and it's actually the real life story of a Black Panther member Fred Hampton and his assassination. Well, I'll let you watch the movie, but it is a very methodically planned out assassination by people in charge.
Oh.
Yeah. Also on Netflix, there's a new crime doc about the Cecil or Cecil. There's people that work there and live there and whatever, and they say it both ways. So the Cecil Hotel, and that's really intriguing. It's only 4 episodes. It takes you on quite a journey. I'm finishing up Shameless UK because it's hilarious, and you gotta have kind of a something to kind of break up all the true crime and stuff.
Yes, no, I understand.
And then just for like giggles, I watched After We Collide. They're kind of teen romancy, but you know, they're geared more adult because they're Netflix. And I guess there's actually a third one coming out, and that's I'm anticipating that one because it seems like each one got a little more adult, if you get what I'm saying. And so then the third one is coming out sometime this year. And then the third follow-up to All the Boys trilogy. There's All the Boys I Loved and whatever. So that third one just came out this week. That one was okay. Like the first 2 were much better in my opinion.
And I have not watched all 3, but I have talked with friends who have, and they felt like the first one was really good, but the second one kind of like lost its way. And I don't know, maybe the third one can kind of bring everything back to.
I'm gonna say the third one. No, if they didn't like the second one, then I don't know that they'll like the third one. It felt a little more forced. It was kind of like the first one did so well, and then they were like, all right, we're gonna do 2 more, and then they did the second one, and then for the third one they were like, oh crap, we've got to have a third one.
Well, I mean, sometimes that is the worst thing that could happen to a movie. It gets super successful, and then everyone's like, we want more, and they were like, but we don't have any more story to tell.
Yeah,
so we're gonna make stuff up. That's the Matrix trilogy. Like the first movie, amazing. Second and third movies, what are we doing here? And now there's a new one coming out.
Maybe with all the new time and technology in movies, it'll be okay.
Yeah, I think it will probably be better than 2 or 3, but it was such a good movie the first time. And then they had so much money in front of them, and so like we got to make more, but we don't have any more story to tell.
Yeah.
So they made something up. It's like the first season of Lost, cool. Second season, okay. By the end, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I never watched that.
Oh, I think you would really like the first season and hate everything else. So totally watch it, because I want you to have a bad time.
Oh man. All right. So this week for episode 32, Adam, you get to start first.
I do.
Have you ever thought to yourself, man, I sure would like to make a podcast. I've got so much to say about blank. Well, if you haven't heard about Anchor, you really should. It is the easiest way to make a podcast, and it's absolutely free. All right, I'm going to tell you why it's so easy. Okay, so with Anchor, there's creation tools that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many others. And you can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Trust me, I'm so excited about this. You can be too. Download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor FM to get started.
And I am excited about this because I love 90s movies. That is my sweet spot. That is the cream in the donut that I believe in. That's where I understood movies. That's where I have spent most of my time watching movies. And the one weird thing about the 90s is it felt, for me as a audience member, that Hollywood was looking for a new action star. Like, I would say the 70s, like late 70s, that was Sly Stallone. In the 80s, you had both Schwarzenegger and Bruce Willis. In the 90s, there was this kind of just void. And Hollywood was constantly either bringing back those guys, and they did great movies in the 90s, but also desperately trying to find a new action hero. And one of the most confusing and awkward action heroes of the 90s was also one of my favorites. It started with a movie that I feel most people have heard of if they don't even like have a huge love for. And technically it wasn't in the 90s, 1989, but it was Heathers. And Heathers is, in my opinion, one of the most well-developed dark comedies that have ever happened, about high school and social structure, and also a lot of murder.
Mm-hmm.
So Brooke, you've seen Heathers, yes?
Mm-hmm. It's been a while, but yes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, 1989, so understandably, has not probably been top of mind. So Christian Slater plays JD, the sort of bad boy who also sets everything in motion. And Heathers is a very complicated movie, which probably has its own class in any psychology curriculum, because it talks about high school, it talks about how you're going to deal with things, and it also does a great job of setting him up as sort of this anti-hero.
Mm-hmm.
And Christian Slater then kind of takes this role into a couple other movies, whether it was The Wiz or The Wizard. In Young Guns 2, he plays a minor character called Arkansas Dave Rudabog, but he's in it barely. Pump Up the Volume is really where you see the character of JD from Heathers kind of morph into the anti-hero trope. So Pump Up the Volume, it's a story of a guy who gets a, I'm going to forget the technical word. He's a DJ that is not on the air. I don't know if it's CB. I don't know if it's just like shortwave radio. It's one of the two.
He's like
pirate radio. Yeah. Yeah. And he is also this kid who comes into town, doesn't know anybody, but he's trying to connect with people in a different way. And as a kid, the idea of having that voice when you don't have a voice, because he's again playing sort of a high school anti-hero. And to me, that was just so seductive. The idea that you could be, by day, just a normal kid going to high school, and by night, this pirate radio savant anti-hero. I never got to use a CB radio. I always wanted one. I wanted a shortwave radio. Like, I would love to be like, hey, this is, what would my CB radio name? I don't know. Would have to be better. Like, Wine Trucker. No, that's not good. I've literally been fighting this for 25 years. Like, I don't know what, like, that's why I haven't got a CB radio, because I don't have a good call name. But it would be really cool to be able to communicate with people on that level and kind of live this double life. And that's why Pump Up the Volume was so cool, because he was living a double life. He was like this nerd at school and nobody wanted to talk to him, but he was a god on the air.
Mm-hmm.
and pushed society and made changes, even though he really couldn't do it in day to day. So you've got the anti-hero from Heathers. You've got a cameo appearance at best in The Wiz. Young Guns 2 just gets shot a lot. That's not cool. Pump Up the Volume, Mark Hunter. And then all of a sudden he bursts onto the scene in one of the biggest movies of 1990. And I know that a lot of people do not like this movie. But Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves has a lot that is good. It has a lot that is bad. It has a lot that people will like point out as being culturally insensitive and also horribly written as a plot. But Will Scarlet is not a bad character. It, again, is sort of the bad boy within a already like Robin Hood and Men of Thieves. Like, you got a lot of bad boys already, but he was trying so hard.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the worst delivered lines in the history of film is delivered by Kevin Costner when he discovers he has a brother who is Will Scarlet. It was so poorly done from a script standpoint. But I will still text some of my best friends with this line as a joke, saying, I have a brother? A brother? Like, it's like, this should have been like a huge moment in the movie, and Kevin Costner just kind of dropped the ball. And Will Scarlet doesn't get his due. The movie is so up and down all over the place. Like, there were so many good things about it, but there are so many bad things about it. And I feel like the thing that we all just remember from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves is the song, All for One and All for Love, because that was a great song. And that might be the best thing that came out of that movie. So the 90s progress, and we're trying to find an action hero. Bruce Willis is getting old. Schwarzenegger is getting old. Sly Stallone is still very old. And they're just throwing darts at the wall. And Ferris Bueller happens. An amazing movie. Probably one of the top 20 movies of all time. And somebody in Hollywood says, hey, what if we take the Ferris Bueller vibe and we turn it into an action movie? And everyone else was probably like, we shouldn't do this, but they still did. So Cuffs happens. Cuffs is basically Ferris Bueller, but his brother is a police special. Police special is a very weird term. Evidently, and this is not something I knew was real. I thought it was just for the movie. But evidently it is real. In the early 90s in San Francisco, they did not have enough police. So they would allow individuals to start their own police force as a, like sort of private business and protect a certain part of the town. Like it would be, like blocks. It wasn't a huge area, but police specials were evidently like actually real. I thought that was a made up thing, but then I looked it up and it happened for a while. I don't know how that is a functional source of city protection, but it was for a while. So Cuffs is about a guy who shows up to ask his brother for money. His brother gets shot, and suddenly he inherits a police special area. So he has blocks he has to protect. And it is oddly a very compelling film because he wants to have a normal life. He has a pregnant wife. He's trying to kind of decide how he's going to be more professional in his life. But he's also doing it in this sort of weird Ferris Bueller style where he's always looking at the camera and telling you and talking to you and explaining what's going on. And it is very, very weird, but it works because Christian Slater is exceptionally charming, and it makes people think maybe he could be both comedy and action hero as well. Later, he is in True Romance, which was Pulp Fiction before it was Pulp Fiction. Mm-hmm. It was pressing like sort of this idea of anti-hero, but also being very aware and trying to create this story that is engrossing, but also allowing you to know that we know that you're watching. Later, he was in one of the best movies of the 90s, in my opinion, in a action vein, which I watched last night, and this is kind of why this all spiraled into a thing, but Broken Arrow. So you got Broken Arrow, where he plays a pilot, Riley Hale, whose co-pilot is John Travolta, and they're flying I think it's an SR-71. It is a stealth bomber of some sort. Mm-hmm. And John Travolta is trying to steal the nukes off of the plane and tries to kill Christian Slater. And the entire movie is just so absurd, but it works in a weird way. This is right after Travolta had done Pulp Fiction, which we just mentioned. And he still has this just amazing personality that is kind of taking over the screen, and Slater rolls with it. We've also got like just a collection of really weird people in the movie. Like Howie Long is in the movie. Delroy Lindo is in the movie. It is a collection of 90s action people all in one movie. Then he goes on to do Hard Rain, which I think I am the only person on earth that loves Hard Rain. In fact, in 1998, in high school, I convinced a bunch of people to go watch this movie. Everyone else hated this movie except me. I had popcorn thrown at me by one of my friends who was like, why are we even here? This movie is so horrible. They threw popcorn at me. Meanwhile, I am loving it. So you've got Christian Slater driving a armored truck during a downpour that becomes so immense that the downpour like is flooding, the streets are flooded, cars can't work anymore. And yet somehow in all of it's charming and I love it. And I think that it was not given the due, mostly from my friends who threw popcorn at me, or from the critics who saw it as sort of a gimmicky movie. And then the very last 90s movie that I feel falls under the action umbrella that Christian Slater did was Very Bad Things. And Very Bad Things is the personification of every bad thing that could happen if you and your boys went to Vegas for a bachelor party before what was the movie? Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I'm totally blanking. Ed Helms.
It's if you hadn't said it, I would have.
I know. Oh my gosh.
Hangover.
They were like The Hangover. Yes. So everything that The Hangover was, Very Bad Things was better earlier and way darker because like The Hangover, like, yeah, somebody got like a face tattoo at some point, somebody got married, but Very Bad Things is all of the really bad things that could happen when you and your boys go to Vegas and you forget what happened. Mm-hmm. It is so much darker than The Hangover. It's like The Hangover, but like plus 5 to 10 in jail. It is a very dark comedy. And Christian Slater plays sort of the character who is edging everybody on at the beginning, but by the end, everybody's in trouble. And it is an action movie, even though it is considered more of a dark comedy. Mm-hmm. So I think, in my opinion, the sort of stealth bomber action hero of the 90s was Christian Slater. And if you have not watched any of these movies, go back and watch them and appreciate the fact that he was trying to do something entirely different, doing some really weird movies, but also always bringing the action.
All right. So Christian Slater is your action movie star.
Stealth action movie star.
Stealth
but yeah.
Action movie star.
Have you seen Hard Rain?
No.
Such a horrible title. So bad. Like it's a movie about a flood. And the 90s were all about like movies about natural disasters, whether it was like we're going to get hit by an asteroid or volcanoes are exploding. And this one was all just about a flood. Mm-hmm. But Hard Rain.
Well, they wanted you to know that the rain... I don't know.
It's such a 90s action movie name, though, right?
Yeah.
Hard Rain. Like, no, like that's not a thing, guys. But it's Hard Rain. No, it's not.
All right. So is that the A side?
That is the A side.
All right. So Adam, I know you love movies. Do you remember the 1981 movie Mommy Dearest starring Faye Dunaway?
Yes.
So that movie is a true story based on the adoption of Christina Crawford by actress Joan Crawford. Joan is also connected to another true crime, kinda. She starred alongside Ramon Navarro from episode 25, if you remember.
Yes. Yeah.
So, well, she's going to come up again in this story. So if you don't know the story of Mommy Dearest, it is iconic. It shed light on Hollywood in a way that I don't think we old school Hollywood that I don't think we'd have ever seen before. And the abuse that Christina Crawford suffered at the hands of a Hollywood star, no one ever thought that a Hollywood star would be that vicious. I mean, the iconic line, "No wire hangers." You have to see the movie to get that line. What most people don't know is that the true story of the adoption. Now, the woman we're going to talk about today is not responsible for Christina, but is responsible for two of Joan's other children and their adoption. This woman who made that adoption possible, her name is Georgia Tann. Georgia is actually credited with legitimizing adoption. I know you're like, but this is true crime. How is she doing good things? There seems to be a degree of good and bad in all. It's just how far I guess you take it.
Fair.
Her influence was substantial, even gaining positive favor from First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who regarded Georgia as an expert on childcare. She even sought her out for advice. It wasn't until after Georgia's death in 1950 that the true details of her deviousness, of her evilness, came to light. So we're going to dive into Georgia Tann. Beulah Georgia Tann was born July 18th in 1891 in Philadelphia. No, not that one. It's in Mississippi. She was born to George Clark Tann and Beulah Yates. Georgia had younger siblings by 3 years, Rob Roy Tann. Her father, George, was a judge, and reportedly he was extremely domineering. George wanted Beulah to become a concert pianist. So at the age of 5, he had her in piano lessons. Those lessons continued until Georgia became an adult. Nellie Kenyon with the Nashville Tennessean reported that Georgia's childhood home was in Hickory, Missouri, and it was very popular with local kids. Judge Tann many times brought home with him abandoned or neglected children. So maybe this sparked Georgia's desire to help other children.
I mean, gave her a unique perspective.
Mm-hmm. So Georgia left Mississippi to attend college at Martha Washington College in Abingdon, Virginia, and she graduated in 1913 with a degree in music. Georgia also, over the course of a couple summers, took courses at Columbia University in New York in social work. Georgia was also by now very proficient in piano, but she actually hated it. What Georgia really wanted was to become an attorney like her father. Well, this is the early 1900s. Women aren't attorneys. But despite this, and again, he wanted her to become a famous concert pianist. You remember this?
Yeah. Yes.
But despite this, and his belief that women could not be or should not be attorneys, she somehow still persuaded her dad to teach her about the law. And she actually passed the state bar in Mississippi. Even though she passed the bar, she didn't follow in her father's footsteps. Instead, she put those Columbia courses to use and she became a social worker. So Georgia, while into helping children, never showed a desire to have her own, nor did she express any intent to marry, ever. We'll see how and why and how that impacted adoption later. Side note, according to Nellie Kenyon's The Tennessean article, Georgia held a brief job as a social worker in Texas after her graduation from school. But the real story begins in 1922. So Georgia got a job working at the Mississippi Children's Home as the receiving director at the Kate Melville Powers Receiving Home for Children. That's according to the book, The Baby Thief, The Untold Story of Georgia Tann, The Baby Seller Who Corrupted Adoption. That book is by Barbara Bisanti Raymond. So you can see where this is going.
Yeah, nowhere good.
Also in 1922, Georgia adopted a baby girl named June. While working at the Kate Millville home, Georgia connected with the daughter of a family friend named Ann Atwood. Georgia and Ann became very close. Wink, wink. They actually became a couple. In 1924, Georgia was fired from the home for, quote, dubious child placing practices. She was inappropriately removing children from impoverished homes without just cause or reason.
Mm.
So after her termination, Georgia, June, Ann, and Ann's son Jack all moved to Memphis, Tennessee, where Georgia got a job as the executive secretary at the Shelby branch of the Tennessee Children's Home Society. So I'm guessing background checks weren't a thing in the 1900s,
I mean,
50s,
probably not.
whatever.
That's a lot of letters to write.
Plus the fact that her, dad had some big time connections didn't hurt her at all. Anne was an unwed mother, which of course was a shameful thing. By now we're in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And so what she did was she added a hyphened Hollingsworth to her name to make it seem that she was a widow. And that's why she was unwed. This is the 50s. They are a couple, but they cannot be open about that. So they have to make it look as more like they're roommates and friends than anything.
Mm-hmm.
So in the early 20th century, two women cohabitating, like I said, independent of financial support from a man, was a situation that was referred to as a Boston marriage. Even though not all of these situations involved same-sex couples, soon it became to mean that. It just became implied. If someone said that they had a Boston marriage, it was assumed that it was a same-sex couple.
Gotcha.
So Georgia and Anne, of course, hid their relationship as lovers. The Tennessee Children's Home Society was the largest orphanage in the state and had branches in Memphis, Jackson, Knoxville, and Chattanooga. Georgia eventually worked her way up and she became the head of the Tennessee Children's Home Society through some deceptive practices and tactics. She basically, she staged a coup and named herself executive director and
well played, Georgia.
Right? I mean, she was like, I'm taking this thing over. I got this.
I am the captain now.
But the horrifying things that Georgia did started before her coup, closer to 1924. So luck, if you'll call it that, was on Georgia's side because she started her schemes and there was an upshift in families looking for children as she was starting her deceptive tactics. According to one ad from the National Home Finding Society, adopting would, quote, reduce divorces, banditry. I don't know how having a child is going to reduce banditry.
I mean, it's less bandits running around.
I guess so. Kids with good homes, now they're not bandits. Okay. Murder and control births. It would fill all the churches and do real missionary work at home and abroad, exchanging immigrants for Americans and stopping some of the road leading to war. That was quite the ad there, huh?
I was going to say, like that, they just brought it with the last line.
So laws in Tennessee allowed agencies to place children with appropriate applicants, but in an effort to ban like the actual selling of children, they were only allowed to charge for their services. The society only charged $7 for adoptions in Tennessee, which today would be $108. So for an adoption, a fee, that's nothing.
That's nothing.
That's
like I could get a kid for $108.
$108.
Like I'm not entirely sure I could pick up a new dog for that.
I think adopting a dog at the Humane Society is like that exact price.
Like it's at least the same, if not more.
Yeah, exactly. So Georgia, because again, this is not a lot of money, so she wasn't going to make any money off of just fees of $7. She found a way around this. She would arrange for private out-of-state adoptions for a premium. Many of the private adoptions were in New York and California, and like as high as 80% of her adoptions. The book Tupelo Man, The Life and Times of George McLean, a most peculiar newspaper publisher by Robert Blade, says that it's reported that between 1940 and 1950, as many as 3,000 children were placed in those two states alone.
Just New York and California.
Just New York and California. And remember, that's only 80%. So she's placing kids everywhere.
Right.
So two women that worked for Georgia, Alma Walton and Regina Warner, they would make tri-weekly trips, which I mean, is that a thing? I don't.
Tri-weekly?
Tri-weekly. Every 3 weeks. Instead of bi-weekly, they do tri-weekly. And they take with them anywhere between 4 and 6 babies on these trips. Alma would head off to California and Regina would go east to New York. Once in their set locations, they would set up in a hotel room and they would meet typically with wealthy potential parents to be. If selected, because this was a real discerning process here, the parents would then write out a $700 check to Georgia Tann. Georgia would sometimes charge these parents for a background check that was never conducted.
Of course not. I don't think many background checks are ever conducted. Just my personal opinion.
Not only would she charge for the background checks, she would charge extremely overinflated air travel rates, and the adoption rate would be 5 times the normal rate. Then, to add insult to financial injury, the state of Tennessee was contributing $61,000 a year to the agency. 31% of that went to the Memphis branch. So that's almost $1 million in today's money that the state was contributing. And like over a quarter of that, almost $300,000 was going to Memphis. So she wasn't hurting for money. Okay.
No, she's doing okay.
She was doing real okay. So Georgia's profits were kept in a secret bank account under a false corporation name. In states like Mississippi, Arkansas, and Missouri, adoptions could be arranged for $750, with Georgia allegedly pocketing between 80 to 90% of the fees.
Jeez.
So Georgia, being the upstanding, amazing citizen that she was, surprisingly failed to report the income to the IRS or to the Tennessee Children's Home Society.
I am shocked. I'm shocked.
Aren't you though? Aren't you?
I'm beside myself. Look at me. That's me there right there. We're both shocked.
In 1979, well after the death of Georgia Tann, the Los Angeles Times ran an interview with Tennessee Special Prosecutor Robert Taylor, in which he stated that 1,200 children were adopted out of the Tennessee Children's Home in a 6-year span between 1944 and 1950, but very few actually remained in Tennessee. So as we mentioned, Georgia's adoptee families were typically wealthy. Some were famous, as we mentioned, Joan Crawford, who adopted twin girls, Kathy and Cynthia. Her son Christopher and daughter Christina were adopted through a different agency. Actress Lana Turner was another client of hers. Actress June Allison and her actor-singer husband Dick Powell used Georgia's agency. An auto racer said he had a baby stolen by an anonymous auto racer said he had a baby stolen by the society. Now, if you're a wrestling fan, you'll recognize the name Ric Flair.
Yes.
Richard Morgan Flair was adopted by Kathleen Kinsmiller Flair and Dr. Richard Reed Flair through the Tennessee Children's Home Society.
So Ric Flair?
Ric Flair.
Oh. Woo!
Woo! Like, woo! Yeah.
Yeah.
Woo! Yeah. That he is
really?
He's a Georgia Tann baby. And chances are the means by which he was gotten, not very legal.
Probably not above board.
No.
No one was saying woo.
Nobody was saying woo. They were saying whoa. In 1935, Governor Herbert Lehman signed a law sealing birth certificates from New York. He also adopted a child through Georgia's agency. So up to now, you're thinking, man, this is a really, well, kind of. You're thinking, oh, she's helping these families. I mean, she's a little deceptive with the money, but she's helping families, right? So now the question is, how in the world did Georgia obtain so many children? Well, she used threats of legal action. She used pressure tactics and other coercive methods to deceive birth parents, typically young, poor, single mothers, causing them to turn over custody of their children. One of Georgia's victims, Alma Simple, described her as a stern-looking woman with close-cropped gray hair, round wired glasses, and an air of utter authority. Another way that Georgia obtained babies was from inmates at Tennessee mental institutions and those that were born wards of the state. Sometimes she resorted to straight up kidnapping in the most devious of ways. For example, this was a time where children could go to foster care, not because the parents wanted to give up their rights to the children, but maybe somebody was sick or they just needed some time to catch up financially. They would place their children in foster care with the thought that they would be going back to get them. And when they went back,
a temporary thing.
Exactly. But when they went back, it's like respite, you know. But when they went to go back and get their children would be gone. Another way that Georgia would get these children is a parent would drop their child off at daycare and then they would return to pick up their child, and they were told that child welfare had come to take them. Georgia, of course, kept no records of these adoptions.
Yeah. Who needs a paper trail?
She would lie to unwed mothers at birth in the hospital, telling them that their babies needed special medical attention. And then later she would tell the mom, oh, I'm so sorry, your baby died. All while secretly adopting them out.
Damn.
Yeah. Georgia
that's some evil stuff right there.
I'm telling you, this woman is ruthless. So Georgia conducted minimal background checks on prospective homes because, well, she was pocketing the fees, and she destroyed records of children who had been processed through the society. Georgia, when questioned, said that the documents that related to adoption were shielded by state privacy laws and that it wasn't illegal to destroy them. Dude, right. I'm going to say it was, but okay. Due to her conduct. I'm
just this lady's like pure bad.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. She's all kinds of bad. So due to her conduct, the Child Welfare League of America dropped the Tennessee Children's Home Society from its list of qualifying institutions in 1941. In the Department of Tennessee State Library and Archives, it cited documents from Judge Sam Bates regarding the matter. Sam Bates was actually a major figure in the Memphis legal community. He not only served as Memphis City Court judge, He also served as Shelby County Attorney General. He was a state rep and a state senator. So Sam Bates said Tennessee Children's Home Society had been dropped from the Child Welfare League of America because of its repeated failure to have homes of foster parents investigated prior to the placement of children for adoption, because Tennessee Children's Home Society had failed to study the children and their heritage before placing them for adoption. Because of the failure of the society to select proper homes for children placed for adoption, because the foster parents had been permitted to select the child rather than placing the children in the home best suited for them, and because the home had engaged in advertising children for adoption and had encouraged hasty placement in disregard of the children's rights to protection from commercial advertising, and because the society had engaged in interstate placement of children at long distances from the sites of the society, which prevented careful home findings and suitable pending adoption. So basically,
maybe my count's off of that was 3 ands, or at least maybe 4. That's a lot of ands.
That's a lot of ands. So basically, he's saying they did a lot of bad stuff. Like,
yeah,
they did not look out for the best interest of the child, is what he was saying.
Yeah, like, here's the book. I'm not going to throw it at you, but you should read it.
I'm waving it very sternly at you. Judge Bates also felt that the society failed to follow the advice of its medical advisors in many respects, which had resulted in the unnecessary loss of life of many children, which had been placed with it for placement for adoption. Most of Georgia's files that were shown to adoptive parents were fraudulent to cover up how the child came into the society's possession. If and when those frauds were uncovered by the adoptive parent, Georgia would threaten legal action against the parent that would supposedly result in the surrendering of the child. Here's a question I have. How in the world did she manage this, and what help did she have? It had to be pretty influential and powerful, right?
Right, yeah. This is not an easy thing to do if you're just a nonprofit.
Right. Well, it was. She was able to accomplish all of her criminal enterprising with the help of Memphis Family Court Judge Camille Kelly. She was a juvenile court judge in Shelby County, Memphis. She was known for wearing colorful dresses, jewels, and a flower pin instead of traditional robes in court. She also wrote 3 books inspired by her experiences in juvenile court. Judge Kelly would use her position to allow Georgia's shenanigans. Georgia would identify a child that needed to be removed from a home, and Judge Kelly would push the case through. Judge Kelly also took custody away from divorced moms, placing them in the care of Georgia, who, of course, then arranged for their adoption to better homes.
Right.
But the reality was that many children were actually placed in homes and used as child labor on farms, or they were placed into abusive families. Okay, so listen to this. Georgia's attorney, Abe Waldauer, in 1947, said in a letter that the prospective couple had complete custody and control of a child for 1 year, and they may submit that child to any physical or mental examination that they wish and take any steps that they may desire to ascertain that they have a healthy and normal child. Nope. So they could do anything they saw fit to that child. Anything. Then it continues. If it is not suitable for them, then Tennessee Children's Home Society takes that child back without question. She's a peach. She's a real peach, isn't she?
That's not the word I'd use.
Treating these babies like they're a mattress or a lawnmower. I don't. And a trial basis, like, yeah. Just like
they were a commodity.
Right. Yeah. So Georgia also had help from another source. Most adoption cases were handled in Dyer, Haywood, and Hardeman counties. And Georgia had help from former Memphis Mayor E.H. Boss Crump, who had tons of political influence up until the day he died. Boss was a big-time bribe recipient from illegal establishments like gambling halls and brothels, and Georgia used that to her advantage. Georgia, of course.
A guy with a nickname Boss is dirty. I am beside myself.
I know, shocking. So Georgia, of course, as we know, was really well respected in her time because we talked about the first lady turning to her for help and advice. And she was admired in the community, and she lived a very lavish lifestyle that rivaled her friends in many influential circles, including prominent families, legislators, and politicians. Of course, this is a true crime podcast, so there has to be an even darker side, if you will, to Georgia. Darker, because we've already discussed some pretty dark stuff.
It's been real dark already.
Yeah. So there are reports of neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and murder of the children in Georgia's care. The Tennessee Children's Home Society didn't actually have their own housing facility, which meant that they used public facilities and foster homes for children awaiting adoption placement. Memphis in the 1930s had the highest infant mortality rate in the country. And if you think this was largely due to Georgia, then you're probably right. For the babies that Georgia thought of as unsellable,
damn,
she would leave them unattended out in the sun until they literally baked to death. She and her lover would beat children for a perverse sexual thrill, hitting them on the scalp so that the bruises weren't obvious. She hung children from their wrists on a coat rack or dangling down a laundry chute. Some children were even molested by Georgia and her associates. The society received a generous donation in 1943 from a wealthy businessman named Fred Smith, the founder of the Dixie Greyhound bus line, in the form of a mansion. This mansion was located at 1556 Poplar Avenue. The nurseries were on the upper levels, and the offices and the child intake rooms were on the first floor. Georgia's staff was typically all female, and their uniforms were that of the old school white nursing uniforms. Although the majority, if not all, were not trained as nurses, and several were even major drug users and abusers. The children in Georgia and her staffers' care were often sedated, and the ones deemed too difficult were allowed to die of malnutrition. When it came to common, preventable, treatable illnesses, Georgia frequently disregarded the recommendations from doctors for the children, ultimately denying them medical care, which led to preventable deaths from preventable causes like diarrhea. Some of the deaths have never been accounted for, while some children were buried in Memphis, but getting an exact total is impossible due to the ones that were unaccounted for. But the estimate is around 500. 500. While Georgia's adoptions were not technically illegal or like black market, they were widely considered ethically and morally wrong. Tennessee Governor Gordon Browning launched an investigation into George and Tann and the Tennessee Children's Home Society on September 11th of 1950. He had received intel that the agency was not adopting, but actually selling children for profit. Memphis attorney Robert Taylor was assigned to investigate the case. Adding fuel to the fire, Public Welfare Commissioner J.O. McMahon accused Georgia and her staff of receiving $1 million in profit, which today would be closer to like 11 million. It's 10 plus million, almost 11 million.
That's a lot of money.
The Tennessee Children's Home Society was closed in December of 1950. It is estimated that Georgia stole over 5,000 children from their homes and families. New York and California both said something needed to be done, but ultimately the investigations were never looked into, meaning no children were returned to their birth families.
Like, this isn't a true crime story. This is a horrible fairy tale.
Yeah.
Like, who's 5,000 children?
5,000 children. Yeah. Well, maybe it was karma. But Georgia, instead of facing charges, died from uterine cancer 3 days before the state filed charges. Judge Camille Kelly quietly resigned on November 11th, 1950. In 1951, it was ruled that while she had faked on many occasions to aid destitute families and permitted family ties to be destroyed, she did personally profit and was never charged. She died on January 28th of 1955. That's Judge Kelly. The children buried in Memphis at Elmwood Cemetery initially had no real markers or headstones, but in 2015, the cemetery raised $13,000 to erect a monument to them. It reads, in part, in memory of the 19 children who finally rest here, unmarked, and all the hundreds who died under the cold, hard hand of the Tennessee Children's Home Society. Their final resting place unknown, their final place a blessing, the hard lesson of their fate, changed adoption procedure, and law nationwide. The Tennessee Children's Home scandal caused reform in adoption laws in 1951. Georgia's practice of creating false birth certificates to hide the origins of the child became standard practice nationwide. In 1979, Tennessee adopted legislation requiring the state to assist siblings who were trying to locate each other, assistance, but that assistance did not extend to birth parents. In 1996, Tennessee enacted Chapter 532 of the Tennessee Public Acts of 1996, which revised the process of getting adoption records. They released them to the adult adoptees of the Tennessee Children's Home Society after receiving permission from living birth parents. Adoption before the 1920s was rare in the United States. So rare, in fact, that from 1863 to 1922, only 5 children per year were placed through adoption. Compare that to Georgia Tann in 1928, who placed 206 children with adoptive families. Due to the fact that Georgia chose wealthy adoptive families, the practice of adoption became associated with influential and famous people, removing the previous stigma of adoption. So she did it in a really clever way.
Yeah. She gave herself cover for all the creepy stuff she was doing.
Yeah. So we talked about how the old Tennessee Children's Home Society was shut down in 1950. There is a new Tennessee Children's Home, which is accredited by the state of Tennessee and has no connection to the old society or Georgia Tann. In 1943, Georgia adopted Ann Atwood Hollingsworth. Remember, Ann is her partner. In Dyer County, Tennessee, using a legal provision that same-sex couples used at the time to ensure that their partners would inherit their property. Georgia was the subject of an episode of Unsolved Mysteries on December 13th of 1989. The movie Stolen Babies from 1993 discusses the scandal. Missing Children, A Mother's Story from 1982 is also another movie on the topic. Georgia is the subject of the 2007 nonfiction book, The Baby Thief, The Untold Story of Georgia Tann, The Baby Seller Who Corrupted Adoption. We mentioned that one earlier. In 2010, Devi Brunch Eiler published her memoir, No Mama, I Didn't Die, My Life as a Stolen Baby, to tell her story as a stolen baby and Georgia Tann victim. Devi met her sister Patricia Ann Wilkes for the first time in 2009. So in 1990, the Los Angeles Times published a story about one of Georgia Tann's babies, Irma Sipple. Now, we mentioned Alma in the very beginning when we first started talking about it. Alma had her daughter Irma taken from her under the pretense as we mentioned, she does. Alma was a single mom. She couldn't afford health care, and Georgia pretended that Irma was hers to get her free care. So a few days later, when Alma inquired about Irma, she was told that Irma had died of pneumonia. Now, I had that as a small child. I was a preemie. I was like 2 or 3. So I know pneumonia is a very serious thing.
Yeah.
But Alma was convinced that her daughter only had a cold and that her daughter did not die. She always felt like that, but she was poor. She was young.
Mhm.
What could she do? She was told that her baby had died and that she had already been buried. So, like I said, she always had that lingering feeling, but there was nothing she could do. She tried unsuccessfully to find her. In 1989, however, Alma was watching Unsolved Mysteries and she recognized Georgia. The show suggested for birth parents to write the Tennessee Right to Know, a volunteer agency in Memphis that reunites families separated by adoption. They were able to locate Irma, whose name, Sandra Kimbrell. The two reunited by phone. Sadly, the two were not able to form a long lasting relationship. And I mean, there's a lot of trauma there. And I'm sure that Sandra doesn't blame Alma, but I mean, she's lived
That's
an
a
entire life.
yeah. That's a lot of distance to cross.
That's a lot of distance. Alma's got a lot of, uh, I'm sure she's got a lot of pent up rage and frustration and hurt. And, maybe Sandra was just content in her life. It's like, okay, I know who you are now, but I got a life.
Yeah. I gotta love my life.
But that is the story of how adoption changed and the illegal shenanigans of Georgia Tann and Ric
We
Flair.
we talk about
Woo!
a lot of bad people on this podcast. This lady might be the worst.
You know, here's the thing. When you think of someone like a Richard Kuklinski, you think, okay, he works for the mob. He's obviously not going to be a good dude. He's in a
Yeah.
gang, he's doing illegal stuff. You naturally assume certain things. But when you hear about a woman and you're like, oh, she's trying to help babies and adopt families, and then you get to the truth of it, you're like, what the heck?
That is some evil shit. That is some evil shit.
I feel like female perpetrators are so much worse. One, I think because we do naturally have an expectation of women being more maternal and being more just caring in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you hear about a woman that does something like this, you're like, what? And to babies, to helpless babies.
To kidnap children for profit, and then evidently many of them just, oh, you're not good enough, so we'll like put you down the laundry chute.
I should also mention that she had a specific type, like Ric Flair. Blonde hair, blue eyes were her baby of preference. Man, we're connecting wrestlers to true crime stories quite a bit these days.
We are. Almost makes you wonder if maybe that entire genre is also flawed and is sending people to their deaths because they are only allowed to be independent contractors and have no health insurance.
Wow. And even in wrestling itself, you've got, what was it, Chris Benoit, that horrible, tragic story.
Yeah, a lot. There's a lot of wrestlers who have either ended themselves or someone else, or clearly have not had the medical support they should have. So we could do an entire episode on that.
We could. We're not, but we could.
I mean, we might at some point, because like this whole, like, honestly, and this is not going to be I love The Rock, but this whole like young Rock sitcom that's going out, it's a lot of gaslighting. His dad dealt with a lot of stuff, and they're not dealing with it in the series.
Oh, really?
And that, I mean, any wrestler, athlete is going to have challenges, and it feels really convenient that everything is just played up to be real sitcom-y.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you know, he's talked about running for president too.
I'll vote for him for president. That's fine, but just wish he hadn't done a sitcom.
Oh,
I mean,
man.
hey, if in Idiocracy we've got, I'm not going to say his name right. Give me a second.
Terry Crews.
Because Terry Crews plays, his name is so good, have to pull it up. It's so absurd, but
Isn't it something
we're not
like
that far
Gatorade
off.
or something?
Oh yeah, it is. It's so ridiculous. So even on IMDb, they only say it's President Camacho. Like, he is so sponsored that he has it as part of his name, and it's not pulling up. But Terry Crews is amazing. Idiocracy is, like, it's weird at this point. Like, we should just all admit that movie predicted the future. It did. We're right there. And like, maybe in 30 years, like, we're gonna be like, hey, Planet of the Apes, that thing was right on.
It's President Dwayne Elizondo Mountain Dew Herbert Camacho.
See, I knew Mountain Dew was in there.
I said Gatorade. I knew it was a drink.
And you know what's funny? Well, that's what they give the plants, because it's got electrolytes. It's what plants crave.
Oh, right. Okay.
I'm on IMDb right now, and do you know what ad is being shown to me?
The Rock.
Yeah, Young Rock.
Of course, it just came out today.
Stop listening to me,
yesterday.
computer.
All right.
2006.
So there you go. That is the B-side this week. Georgia Tann, who's not a good person at all.
I really dislike this lady.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I can objectively say that. Like, were she to be lit on fire, I would not bring any water to help her.
Wouldn't even spit in her direction.
No.
Mm-mm.
All of my not helping. She bad.
She real bad. Real bad. All right. So before we go, ways that you can help the show, we would so be appreciative and grateful. Real quick, want to say a thank you to Bluegrass Outdoorsman, who left us a really sweet rating. And Adam, he said, keep up the good work. Thanked me for my service. Thank you for your review. We really appreciate you. You can head on over to Apple and you can leave us a rating or a review, a rating and a review.
I mean,
your choice.
Just do it all. I mean, it's just easier to like do the whole thing.
Otherwise,
you got to like you got back up, just do the whole thing.
Just do the whole thing. You can also, and it does really help us if you leave a rating and a review. It helps us in the numbers on Apple, and that is greatly appreciated. You can always head on over to our website. It's A-Side, B-Side, podcast.square.site. We have show notes over there. We have photos. We have sources for each of our episodes over there, as well as merch. You can always buy us a coffee. It's buymeacoffee.com/A-Side, B-Side pod. And all of the money from that goes to production and promotion of the show. We do
also coffee.
And also coffee.
Sometimes it goes to coffee.
It does go to coffee as well. Yes. We are on all the socials. We are on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We are on Instagram. So check us out. All right. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Brooke.
As always, thank you for listening to A-Side, B-Side podcast. If you enjoy the show, please, if you don't mind, head on over to Apple and leave us a rating or a review. And if you'd like to continue to support the podcast, you can do so by heading on over to Patreon, or you can buy us a coffee, as well as buying merch on our website, A-Side, B-Side, podcast.square.site. From Adam and I at A-Side, B-Side podcast, please remember to wear your mask, social distance if you're around people that don't live in your household, and just be safe and happy. Thanks again from us here at A-Side, B-Side podcast.